we are back, and I think we have Ron. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here. I can hear you.
Okay, and Rabbi Rosenburg, can you hear us loud and clear?
Yes, thanks so much for having me, and shalom to you, Ron.
Okay, all right. So, what I wanted to ask you first to get things off and started, I want you to answer a quick question. It's two questions, and I just want a yes or no. I really just want a yes or no, not a maybe, if that's possible, Harry. So the first question is, do you believe, or does the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jews believe that they are the bloodline, authentic descendants of Jacob's descendants, the 12 tribes of Israel? And I want to answer yes, no.
I mean, it's a very you don't want to maybe, you want to yes or no, but it's very clear because we record families amongst us who are, and many families who are no or not. So there's not a blanket. We don't consider ourselves one group in that regard. But I'll tell you also that the people within that category make this an irrelevant question.
Okay. All right. So then the second question.
We can talk about that why as well. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. The second question, being that you've researched and you've studied a lot of different tribes, I see on your social media you talk about the Ethiopian Jews, the Lemba Jews, the Igbo Jews, and everything. And so you're familiar with West Africa and some of the Hebrew traditions and customs in the Igbo people. And you already know that a good number of African Americans, their ancestors, were taken from West Africa during the transatlantic slave trade, and they were brought over to the Americas, a very high number. When you're looking at the Igbo, you're looking basically at the slave coast, where you had Nigeria, which can encompass the Yoruba land and Igbo land and the Ibibio-Efik land as well, and Cameroon, as well as Ghana, Togoland, and Benin, Dahomey, and the Ivory Coast, and we can even go all the way up to Senegal, Gambia. But that being said, and these people all have the same blood type DNA that connects them back to West Africa, especially with the Igbo people. With that being said, do you believe that the African Americans in America, or so-called Negroes, are descendants of the ancient biblical Hebrew Israelites, the sons of Jacob, and therefore they are Semitic people and are also the chosen people of God, as most black church people, really are calling people Gentiles? Do you believe that African Americans are children of Israel?
Right. It would seem to me, based on from what I understand of the Igbo culture and their return to Torah now, and my very clear understanding that many Igbo were taken to the Americas on slave ships, it would seem a very logical conclusion that would mean a lot of the children of the Igbo tribe are in America, and if we're considering the Igbo tribe the children of Israel today, that's great. But when we look at this phenomenon, which we could discuss at length, we don't say 5 million Israelites made it to Africa, became the Igbo, or we don't say 10,000 Israelites made it to Africa. For all we know, it could have been one human who made it to one region of the world. And I'm not saying this is specifically for Africa. This is for any nation around the world that's identifying Israel today. Look at the story of Esther or the story of Joseph. These are stories of Israelites who have risen to places of power where they've become ruler over a land. They've gotten married and had prominent family that were born from them. So imagine the story of the Israelites scattering around the whole world. You're going to assume in different regions of the world, Israelites are going to become, prominent, have children, and have large plans for them. So there's rabbis today who pass away in our lifetime, and they'll have 2,000 or 3,000 descendants of theirs show up. Mark my words, 2,000 or 3,000 descendants, humans that come from one man, will show up to a funeral. So my answer is, yeah, the African Americans in America, that would make total sense to me and be a beautiful thing that you see the blood of Israel flowing through them. But then to start to pick and choose who is and who isn't, that's another question. But yeah, I fully believe with all my heart and soul that could be the case.
Okay, now before I get Ron on the line, because he has a lot of questions. Don't you think it's important when black people are reading their Bibles and they're reading the Old Testament, and they're reading about Ezekiel and Isaiah, and they're reading about Daniel, and they're reading about prophecy, and they're reading about Gog and Magog and the bands of Togarmah and Tubal and Meshach and all these different nations of Japheth, Shouldn't we know who these people are today? Because if everybody's descended from Noah and his 3 sons, if you look at
everybody, it's over.
I'm sorry, there's some background noise. So if you look at the table of nations, you see that you have the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Shouldn't we know as black that are Christians and also Hebrew Israelites today that are in the truth? Shouldn't we know who is who, as according to the Bible? You have the Chaldeans saying that they're from the land of Ur, they're the Chaldeans. You have the white-skinned Arabs or the dark-skinned Arabs that are saying that they're the sons of Ishmael. You see that there's people that in Africa that don't ascribe to being Hebrew Israelites, and they would most likely ascribe to the sons of Ham. But you also see people that are ascribing to the sons of Shem and Jacob. I mean, nobody's really saying that they're Edomites confessing it, but when we look at the land that Japheth and his people inherited, and we look at where the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jews and where their people mixed and mingled, and then eventually came down into Israel in 1948, shouldn't we have some clarification and some truth as to who is really who? I mean, we all know about the strangers and the foreigners, but we should know and have a clear distinction of who is the real Israelites and who is not. Because, the Bible and a lot of Jews say if you bless Israel, God will bless you if you bless Israel. But it seems to me that a lot of people, the whole world is being deceived to be in blessing the wrong people. And those that are the true Israelites that have been keeping the traditions and the customs of the Old Testament for a long time, for decades and millennia, and even have it embedded in their language, these people will be the authentic Hebrew Israelites, not the people that had to go to Hebrew school and learn Hebrew traditions and customs of people that were converted to Judaism back many centuries ago. So don't you think it's important that we have truth? Because, the Bible talks about Satan being the father of the lies, and he talked about, Christ talked about the Pharisees being of the father, and the father's the devil, and he's a liar every time he speaks of it. So shouldn't we have some truth when we're reading the Old Testament and the New Testament?
That's a great question, and I'll just start my answer off with a little story. When I visit America, because I live in Israel now, but when I visit America, and let's say I'm on an airplane or on a train or on a bus, wherever I am, and I'm next to someone who's an African American. So, we engage in a dialogue. We say, what's going on? Everything good? Life okay? Then I say to them, something interesting I'm studying. Did you know about the Igbo tribe in Africa, that they're one of the largest tribes in Africa that identify as being from the children of Israel? And they say, no, I didn't really know about that. And then I say, well, did you know also that this tribe made up a large percentage of the transatlantic slave trade? And they say, no, I didn't really even know about that either. And I say, well, you have some Google homework to do when you get home then, because there's some interesting stuff going on. And, I have that conversation frequently. I find it fun to just plant those seeds in people's minds, and I'm sure that's what you do full time, trying to do that to your nation and your people who you identify with. Now, when it comes down to, you said, if you are, then shouldn't you be learning the scriptures to identify everyone on planet Earth today? And I think that's where it gets a little dangerous for you to make that assessment right now, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a very tricky game when you become in the driver's seat of decoding prophecy. But the Torah is very clear on things it wants us to do as a nation. So instead of saying to me, shouldn't we be learning the scriptures to find out who is who today? Why aren't you saying to me, shouldn't we be learning the statutes and the commandments fully from the Torah of how to become a nation again? As far as the Shabbat and making tzitzit and making a sukkah, putting a mezuzah, all the laws that are applicable today. How come that shouldn't be the focus on educating and giving birth to a people?
Right, that's a good question and a good point you made. But we all know that in the state of Israel, there's a rabbinical board that determines who is an Israelite and if you're allowed to return and make the Aliyah back to Israel. And you have the Indian Jews, the B'nai Manasseh, and you have other different, the Ethiopian Jews. And, of course, before they're allowed as a people to even come in a mass number to Israel, just being honest, you're not going to all of a sudden just take all the Biafra and the Igbo Nigerians and say we're going to bring it all back to Israel, because that hasn't happened yet. But with the Ethiopian Jews, you have to. It seems like you have the state of Israel determining who is Israelite and who is not. And if you accept that they're Israelite, whether from the tribe of Dan or from the tribe of Benjamin, then they have to be accepted by you guys to come into Israel. They have to be given a bath, a mikvah in a pool or in the flowing stream. They have to adopt a Talmudic Judaism. They have to obtain a Hebrew name and they basically have to do what you guys say they got to do to come into the state of Israel when these people, especially the Igbo Jews and a lot of other West African tribes, they've been practicing this as their traditions and customs. It's been ingrained in them for centuries, for generations, and all they've kept is the oral histories and these traditions and customs which make them Hebrew Israelites. But you have the state of Israel saying that you guys, you got to prove to us, and it's really disheartening when you see movies like Doing Jewish and all these different these Jewish filmmakers that come in and they go into Africa and they meet up with the different African, West African tribes, and they force the Talmudic Judaism, they force the hexagram, the Star of David on them. They force a lot of the ways that is taught through Babylonian Judaism, and a lot of them end up thinking that the European Ashkenazi Sephardic Jews are actually their blood brothers. And we all know that two Ashkenazi people, a woman and a man, cannot birth a Nigerian Igbo child. So when one person says, I'm a Levite, and another person says, I'm a Levite, you got a black person and a white person, how is that possible? So there's some confusion. We need to understand, I believe, that who is the Gentile convert or proselyte that converted to Judaism, why they're in Israel right now, and then who are the real Israelites that are coming out in Africa and even in America saying that, hey, we are the real people, because it really all changes biblical prophecy. And even though you say we shouldn't be trying to concern about biblical prophecy, the Bible is about prophecy, and we can't really read the Bible without understanding prophecy, because that's what it's about prophecy, about, like you said, the Torah and the laws and commandments, the Messianic prophecy. So, in my opinion, I think it does matter. And, in my books and even with the show, we try to get clarification and show who is who. And, Ron, Divine Prophet, he does a lot of research on a lot of things, pre-exilic, going back into BC times, and he also has a lot to add in regards to these things that are going on. And Ron, if you wanted to jump in and kind of comment on some things and ask those some questions, and I'll follow you, if that's okay.
All right, appreciate that,
wait,
Ron.
just one second.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I didn't know if you wanted an answer.
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, have a good night.
No, I don't. They're on the floor. Oh my God, she has a child.
So I was saying you asked me questions. You wanted me to answer them.
Go ahead. You can answer.
How you get out?
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, Ron. I just wanted to end the points. I always like to address points. Okay, so just to be clear, because you were talking about the Ashkenazi and Israel, I just want to make a few points before we move on. The Ashkenazim, I think we'd say, or genetically and historically, they came from 4 European women, and about 200 families gave birth to the Ashkenazi people today. So it wouldn't be possible to take them and use that as the only case study to move backwards in time as descendants of the people of Israel. So the Ashkenazim aren't saying we are the exclusive descendants of Israel, or we're the largest, percentage of the survivors. They are a remnant of a small remnant, but their whole entire culture flourished around Torah observance and Torah study, which allowed them to flourish the way they did. Well, we'll get back to the Ashkenazi later on with Ron. Secondly, I wanted to mention this. You're talking about the rabbis in Israel and allowing people to come back or not come back. And you and I may agree on a lot more things politically about Israel than you would think, because I'm not necessarily in favor of this institution or the way Israel's governing or dealing with this phenomenon. I'd just like to bring up the real good point also that the Jewish people teach about the mixed multitude, that all the sages of Israel for the last 2,000 years has warned the Jewish people that in the future the final battle that they face before the redemption of the global Israel is that of the mixed multitude, who appear as Jews and dress like Jews and act like Jews and take on leadership roles of Jews, but they come from the side of evil and they must be dealt with in the end of time. So that is the pinnacle of being a religious Jew today, is understanding that that's something that's happening. And then secondly, I would just want to, before we move on, just flip the question on you, is, now that there's the government of Israel, which I still think is an amazing thing, because now Israelites are showing up from around the world, even small amounts, that you have one nation now of Ethiopians, of people from Nigeria are in Israel. You have the Demonic community in Israel. You have B'nai Menashe from south of China, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Mizrahim. There's a whole cohort, a group of people uniting now in a beautiful way outside of political Israel, which is beautiful. And just the final thing, just to flip the question on you, now pretend you're the government of Israel. Let's say pretend you are, and obviously you did your DNA research, so you have your own biased opinion of who you think Israel is. But you get requests from, let's say, over 100 million people around the world today who are identifying as being from the children of Israel, including, 50 million from Afghanistan to India. Then in India, another, could be millions. Japan, there's potentially 70 million Shinto who have an identity about this. In Africa, there's, the Igbo already 40 million. So how would you as a government deal with being the size of New Jersey but getting 100 million people looking to invoke a free flight and money upon landing and being put into a system on the land?
Well, the problem is that the question is bigger than me, because everything has a perfect divine plan from the Creator. And even though I know why you guys are in Israel, a lot of people that's in the black church today do not understand why you guys are really in Israel. Those that are awake know that why you're in Israel, and we know that Gog and Magog those that are awake know that Gog and Magog are you guys. And so the Gog and Magog are the ones that are supposed to come against Israel in the last days to destroy Israel and Torgomov and all his bands and different people. And when the people understand who is Gog and Magog, or who has a trace of the bloodline of the Edomites in them, then they will understand why all these things are happening. Why are these things happening with the slave trades, with the Catholic Church, with the Jewish slave traders, with the Arab slave trade, with different things happening with Russia and China today. We will understand all these things, including Freemasonry that's rooted in Islam, rooted in Judaism, rooted also in Freemasonry and the Catholic Church. People will understand what the synagogue of Satan is and why Christ made these prophecies about what was to come in regards to the second temple and the third temple, the millennial temple. Even when Ezekiel did his prophecy in Isaiah, when it talks about the regathering of the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and it talks about Cush and Pathros and Elam and the islands of the sea. It even talks about Sinim, and I'm sure you know what Sinim means in Hebrew. So these are all over the place, but God has a perfect plan for everything, and so you guys are in there for a reason. You're not supposed to be there, but you believe you're there, and a lot of people in Israel, like many people know, are not really religious people. A lot of them are atheist Jews. A lot of them are just there benefiting from the title Jew, and living off the fact that the world believes that you are Jews, so you get many benefits from our government and from other governments in the Christian church to help establish the state of Israel. But it was all a perfect plan. So I really can't answer the question that what would I do if I was in Israel and I had all these people saying I want to come in to be a part of Israel because we're all Israelites now, because that just I'm not in control of future and destiny of what's to come in the last days. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for addressing it. I do appreciate it very much, and we'll see what happens. I like where you're going with this, but it's just, to me, it looks like a theory and a speculation based on decoding prophecies. I would say, first of all, you quote, the synagogue of Satan. That's a New Testament doctrine, so Jewish people don't believe that anything that came from the church or the time of the councils, all this stuff, that we don't take it serious. But if I would say if there was an ever group of people who wrote the word synagogue of Satan in Latin, the people who wrote that are probably the synagogue of Satan. So now if you see today the Vatican and all the human sacrifices going around the world and what they do with little kids and that they stored all the ancient books, like that would mean, like, wait, that probably seems like the synagogue of Satan. So like a bunch of small, villagers or people from around the world uniting, learning Torah, that seems cool. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of secular atheists in Israel, and there's a lot of Freemasons who are probably Jewish over time as well, which we could speak about. So I think you have to just have the power of discernment, that we got to be able to discern wicked from righteousness and see that surrounding the Torah there's going to be a new union that's going to get formed. But I respect your opinion. I'm just letting you know how I feel about it. Now, I don't want to be rude to Ron because I sold the ball before, so we could pass the ball.
No. Okay, Ron, you can go ahead and you give Rabbi your dialogue.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate your input and feedback to Ron Dalton's questions, Rabbi Rosenburg. My angle is slightly different, but doesn't deviate too much away from the premise that was established by Ron. What I would like to ask is just a couple of questions, kind of gauge what your worldview is, so that way I don't create any straw men in interfacing with you, and I can ensure that whatever I ask or whatever type of engagement and dialogue that we have that is pertinent to what both our worldviews are. So my particular position, if you're not already aware of it, is I'm getting into a particular area of research that deals with the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes, exiled into West Africa, and bringing certain customs with them that would be a time capsule for what was captured from what they were doing before they got exposed out of the land. So when Sennacherib had sieged Samaria and sieged the northern tribes, we have a great amount of northern tribe Israelites who settled in Judea and the south to flee, and another good portion of them made their way along the Nile and took the sub-Saharan route over to West Africa over hundreds of years and settled there. They brought several customs with them that we see now amongst the peoples of West Africa, but these customs ceased to be practiced once the southern tribes went into Babylonian captivity for 70 years and returned back during Persian captivity by way of Cyprus and then later on Darius to rebuild the temple, the city, the walls, etc. So what I have noticed is a distinction between the ancient pre-exilic Israelite culture and customs, along with practices, traditions, etc., and what is now labeled as Second Temple Judaism, right? So what I would like to know for you is that, are you familiar with the dichotomy of Second Temple Judaism and the ancient pre-exilic Israelite practices?
Yeah, I mean, those were definitely great questions, and here's the way I look at it is you're certainly right. I mean, today when the Jewish people study the Torah, study the laws, they study very specific topics and don't cover a lot of things that may have been relevant to the time when we were living in the land with the temple. So, they'll study the laws of monetary cases or the laws of, of prayer, but when it comes to the laws of how to, let your land rest on the Sabbath of the year, that may not be as strongly studied because of survival in the exile. But at the time of the Second Temple, which you're speaking about, which certainly, we had Ezra and Nehemiah, and then they formed the Great Council of Sages, the Great Assembly, and they started, ruling the people of Israel. There was still a small time period where prophecy was in existence, and yet this new culture, these new ways of practicing and upkeeping the Torah was being formed. So the way I look at it is what happened during the Second Temple and the survival of the Torah throughout the generations, that was divine, and that was on purpose. That's going to play a beautiful role. That doesn't mean that tribes who went into exile prior, which a large bulk of the nation went missing prior to this period, were lost all around the world. It would make sense that they are carrying certain traditions that may have been more dependent on commandments based on actually living in the land. That would make sense to me. And I mean, I would ask you also, because it's great that you're doing the research on the 10 tribes in Africa, I would wonder that maybe there was also Judeans. As Josephus said, I think it was 1 million or millions, he says, of Judeans fled into Africa during the destruction of the temple. And also, would you assume that the 10 tribes also had probably scattered maybe even one human or maybe 10,000 humans to the north and to the far east of Israel throughout the exiles?
Yeah, so that's great feedback, and it seems like you know the direction I'm going, so we can dialogue on that. So what I would say is that prior to the 70 AD destruction of the temple, prior to the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD, prior to the last Sanhedrin Council in the land of Israel, where we get the Hillel II calculation in regards to the calendar system, and then the expulsion of the Israelites, or the Judeans, during that time. Prior to all of these incidences, we had these northern tribes that had already migrated into West Africa. So being that these northern tribes had migrated into West Africa, the question is, once the southern tribes got exiled, and we had a good portion of, like you mentioned, Josephus, who says about 1 million or so of them went into Africa, we have to look at the migration routes, settlements. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I'm getting to my final question I would like to ask you to see what your perspective is on it. But we'll see a situation where we have people who are reported to be Jews, quote unquote, and I say that's a misnomer when it comes to the northern tribes that were in West Africa. And I'm not saying that the northern tribes were limited to just West Africa. We know they were scattered abroad all over into Mesopotamia and other areas of the world. But I'm putting a particular emphasis on West Africa because it makes my point that I'm about to follow up with. We find that there are practices that they keep, the mitzvot that they keep, but other practices they keep, that if a foreigner who is only familiar with the Bible, or let's just say the Torah, Tanakh, whatever the case may be, was to see these people in West Africa and look at their practices, they would be able to say, wait, these individuals are doing this and these individuals are doing that, and wow, that's interesting. But how would they know the distinction between who are the ones from Judea who fled and who are the ones much earlier, hundreds of years earlier, from the northern tribes who fled into Africa? Well, you have to examine the practices they be doing a little bit more intricately. And an example of that is this, and this is going to make my point, and then I would like your feedback on this. When we look at the story of Hadad El-Dani, where he was speaking to the Algerian Yahudim and was reporting to them what he encountered in sub-Saharan Africa, he said, man, you know, when I went to sub-Saharan Africa, I had encountered some quote-unquote Jews there. He said, but I realized that from their traditions, from what they said they came from, who they are, they were identifying themselves as being the specific northern tribes, right? Gad more specifically, but they also mention Naphtali, and they also mention Asher, if I'm not mistaken. And he said to them, he said, man, but what I noticed was very distinct was that these individuals were not familiar with halakhic law. These individuals were not familiar with the Talmud, which would include the Mishnaic writings and the Gemara. They would not be familiar with any of these things that you guys are familiar with. So he says that this is an authentic account that these individuals are from the northern tribes, as they said, because if they were banished in 701 AD and they exiled and went into West Africa over a period of time, then it would make sense that they would not understand anything of Second Temple Judaism because they would not have been exposed to it because they've already been exiled. So these individuals have made their way into sub-Saharan Africa and have settled there and kept their oral tradition, their social memory, and their customs, practices, and the way they perform their mitzvot, then it's evident that these individuals who are living there, and this is the 9th century AD, that's reported by Hadad El-Dani, we see it's very evident that these individuals were northern tribes, had customs and practices they were doing that they would be unfamiliar of what any kind of Second Temple Judean Israelites would have been practicing. So if this is the case, do you believe that it is necessary for those individuals, and I'm just using West Africa as an example because these people exist all over the known world, do you believe that it is important for those individuals to convert over to, let's say, Reform Judaism or any form of Judaism if they are maintaining the customs, practices, and their way they perform their mitzvot, like we even see with the Beta Israel? With a similar case scenario where there were some halakhic laws that they weren't unfamiliar with and certain other First Temple practices that they performed that they would have been unfamiliar with Second Temple practices, do you think that it is right by way of the Torah or by way of your worldview that they should be converted over to a form of Judaism that would be unfamiliar to them and their ancestors in order for them to be right back in alignment with the way that Torah should be properly practiced?
That's a great. You're asking, by the way, super questions, and I'm very thrilled to give this answer. I say, my opinion, unlike a lot of people in Israel today, is we should absolutely not be converting anyone. First and foremost, if there's an identity of someone being from the same family, if let's say you lose a cousin who disappears, and 10, 15 years later they find that he's okay and you get in touch with him, is the first question you're going to ask him, how many times a day are you praying, or are you going to say, are you okay, do you have food, water, and shelter? So I'm a strong believer that the first phase of this whole phenomenon of all these people around the world with this identity is not about converting to any religion and not making this about a religion, but making this about doing very strategic things together to clear the world from evil and decentralize and turn this into a geopolitical save the planet type of operation. But just to elaborate on your question a little bit, and then we can talk about God after there's world peace and there's no more ruling people, middlemaning in our lives, and we could talk about God. But I just want to respond because you spoke about Eldad Hadani, which was a Jewish explorer. I forgot exactly what year, maybe somewhere around 1,800 years ago. I forgot exactly. If you maybe know better. He reported back to the Judeans of the Mediterranean communities who were all studying the same Torah he said to them that sub-Saharan Africa, I found people who were from the tribes of Israel. It's all over Jewish writings for the last 2,000 years that part of the main step, or the next step for the Jewish or the Judean exile, is actually uniting with this remnant of Israel. And a lot of our prayers are written from this perspective, and a lot of the mystical sages, the rabbis of Israel, all wrote their books of saying that this is the crucial piece to surviving and getting to the exile. So that's really, and that's why, and we also say at that time when the Jewish people unite with the tribes of Israel, then the nature of the Torah is going to change. It's going to be called the Torah of the redemption, the Torah of the Mashiach, the Torah of the Messiah. So I'm saying, if when this time happens, we evolve out of the Torah that we're currently, the way we practice living now, we'll get new commandments that are evolving, maybe around living in the land, etc. When this time period happens, then we're all going to be in this new union together. So are we supposed to bring the whole world into something that we're about to evolve out of? It's like a chicken and egg thing. No, because I believe we evolve out of this religion when the whole world unites. And just to answer a few of your points, just to continue, you were saying that when the tribes are in Africa, shouldn't we? How do we know what we're looking for? Because we're looking for Second Temple Judaism. We're looking for a really teeny small remnant of the Israelite diaspora. And so when someone says to me, let's say we're speaking about the tribes in Afghanistan or in Africa, they'll say, well, how do you know that the tribes, are they doing all the commandments that we're doing now? And I say, well, why would you even assume that they should be? They left prior to the Second Temple. They were in exile. And secondly, a lot of the tribes were idol worshippers who left Israel as idol worshippers as well. So you have to assume that amongst many of these tribes, you may see still the concept of foreign deities and there were certain rituals that are considered idol worship. So that's one point I say. So, for example, when the Afghans, who are 40 million people in Afghanistan, said they're from the exile of the First Temple 2,700 years ago, the first thing we did was create relationships with them, form bonds, understand them, understand the culture. But we just did for academic purposes. We sent a survey all across Afghanistan to people who identified as being from the tribes of Israel, a Google survey with lots of different questions about who they are, their identity, their names, their legends, what their ancestors told them, their customs, traditions. And they were very eager, very happy to fill out the survey and answer all these questions. And we were pulling from different regions all across Afghanistan. It's a huge region, a huge nation. And we noticed that there was a very clear distinction between certain things that the Jewish people would consider Judaic or rabbinic Judaism, and then Torah Judaism. So there's two sets of laws that the Jews practice. There's Rabbinic Judaism, which is fences and safeguards we put around the commandments, and then there's Torah Judaism, which is just simple commandments from the Torah, to like wear your fringes or to do certain ways to prepare your meat. So we saw amongst the Afghan Pashtuns who claimed to be from the first exile, we saw that they're clearly doing tradition, customs from the Torah from the First Temple period, but not necessarily things that became Rabbinic Judaism later on in life, which is very interesting. And so from my perspective is, if you say how do we know what to look for, the first thing is, you could find a lot of traditions of the Israelites a lot around the whole world, and we all know that. But it's not about playing detective and saying who we think is. What I think is crucial is who's saying they are. And that's the people that should be at the table. Like the Igbo people we all know are taking the right steps. You have guys like Remy Lona writing books, but you have their whole nation there. They're wearing talit. The leader of the freedom, the Free Biafra movement, Nami Kondo, I think his name is. He wears a talit prayer shawl to his court cases. They're a nation, returning to the Torah, which is it's gonna have ripples across the whole world. So I'm all about the other West African communities you're speaking about joining in on the Torah also. But I'm that if they show up to the table, that would be great. I understand there's lots of individuals, but as a nation, that's still something that could have to happen. And if there's individuals out there like yourselves waking them up, and what you're doing is bringing Torah to people, which is a very sane thing. And just my last thought, just to end, sorry so long, if there was these tribes in West Africa today who are now in touch with you guys, and they're showing you their First Temple traditions, etc., wouldn't they still be interested in adopting the Torah that they left? Because let's say you have Second Temple Judaism that forms, it was still based on a super high percentage of actual commandments from the Torah of how to keep them, how to preserve, what the Torah is implying, what it means. So wouldn't there want to be still a value kept in the Torah that was preserved over the exiles? That was my question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase the question? I'm kind of went out a little bit towards the end.
Okay, sure, yeah. I mean, I gave a few solid points that I brought up. I hope everyone heard me loud and clear. If
I heard that.
I could say it again. Okay, my final question was that if there were remnants of the tribes of Israel, let's say in West Africa, wouldn't they be interested still, or anyone, or from a Hebrew Israelite, in actually learning the Torah and its commandments that was preserved throughout the times when Ezra and Nehemiah started redacting law and writing things down, and in the time of Judah the Prince, where they actually wrote down the laws prior to the Talmud being written, so they just wrote down all the laws of the Mishnah. Wouldn't this be of interest to the returning Israelites? As like, hey, I forgot the verse, but there's a story in the Tanakh, in the books, where they was in the Second Temple period, and they went, I forgot how many years without a Torah, and then they found the book of the Lord, and it was like a feast because they had lost the Torah, but then they got it back, and they made a celebration. So now, these returning Israelites, wouldn't the next evolution be to return to Torah and Torah law?
All right, so that's a great question, and what I would say is that returning back to Torah law is kind of subjective because it's a reconstruction process. And the reason why I say that is because when the southern tribes were exiled, they were exiled into Babylonian, right? And being in Babylonia or Mesopotamia in general, there was one community called Al-Yahudu that was created that we see in certain post-exile tablets that's found in the along the Tigris-Euphrates River. And we saw that they were actually being prosperous in that region when they were exiled to, right? So in these tablets, a lot of them were receipts for daily transactions that was occurring. And being that these Judeans were unfamiliar with Aramaic and the cuneiform script that was being utilized, they had the Chaldeans actually, wedge in the cuneiform in these tablets for these receipts and various things with these Semitic names in it. The reason why I bring that up is because living there for 70 years, right, this is when we started getting titles like rabbi, this is when we started getting synagogues and all these other things because the Levites no longer had the same role in Jerusalem now that they're in exile. So they were trying to find another way to use their astute teachings in order to formulate a way of life. But at the same time, they came into contact with foreign peoples, and they're no longer a self-contained sovereign nation. With that being the case, being in exile for 70 years and being told by the Most High in the book of Yemayahu, chapter 29, to settle down, they would have came into contact with other practices and other customs. And I'll give you an example of that. An example of that is that when the Israelites return and we get to at least the Grecian period where we have the translation of the Septuagint, we have a situation that occurs where the Judeans did not want the name of the Creator to be placed in vain. So what they did was they changed things out and they used Adonai or used Hashem and these different terms like that because they didn't want the Gentiles to spoil the name of the Most High. Now this is interesting because when you look at Marduk and in the Babylonian culture, and Marduk's name was very holy, or Chodesh, and the Babylonians did not want his name to be spoiled, so what they did was they put Bel, meaning what we would say today is Lord or Master. And this is a fingerprint marking of a custom that was borrowed from the and during these after exile period, being in Babylon and returning back into Israel, which is one of many fingerprints of something that is foreign, that was not native practices of the Israelites. And this is very, very important because when somebody says that Torah was preserved, I'm saying, well, can you show me a Torah that they've had while they were in exile? We don't have any Torah preserved today of the exile, during the exile period. We don't have that. So coming back and returning back, having a social memory and oral tradition and having to find a book, what we see in the book of Nehemiah, they just found the book. And they started speaking from the book because everybody in the current generation were not familiar with the Hebrew language. A lot of them were adopting Aramaic and other languages as well. That's why I said that some of those who had understanding spoke to these people, right, and tried to break certain things down. This is where we start getting the Targums, which were paraphrases of what we see in the Torah, so that way those who spoke Aramaic would be able to understand. So the point I'm trying to make with this is it's a reconstructive process to find out what the original mitzvot was and how it was practiced. An example of that I would bring up for you, Harry, would be casting lots. casting lots was something that was common that we see in the Tanakh. Do we know how that practice is performed today? That was not outlawed by the mitzvot that the Most High, or the Torah the Most High gave Moshe. This was something that was actually running concurrent with the mitzvot. So we don't even know how that practice. Matter of fact, the human doing that we speak about as far as the breastplate of the high priest, do we even know how that is used and operated? We don't know. These are things that we are trying to speculate over to try and reconstruct on what was done. So there's a lot of the laws that were practiced that we either lost or that was only kept barely from oral tradition or that was kept via a social memory. And now when they got time to write everything back down, that does not mean everything is exact. So what I do is that I use comparative cultures, right, and I use archaeology to also complement what we read today in the Tanakh to try and reconstruct to see what actually took place. You know, how did people build their homes? You got to go to archaeology for that because that also changes the dynamic of the family. And when people go into their home, if you was in a mud brick 4-bedroom home, that changes the dynamic of the family and where you place the animals and where you sleep at and who gets first priority. You have to study archaeology to be able to see these things. So this is very, very important because we have to do a reconstructive process in order to understand how mitzvot was really practiced and, you know, not only who has it perfectly preserved today, but where can we grasp various these practices from whoever is using them today and reformulate it into a profile that we all can fit in to say, look, this is the best that we can do in trying to figure out what Torah is, and when the Most High comes back, he's going to restore it. So the question I will leave you off with and responding to that is, I would be very leery in saying that any one people has the pure Torah. I mean, you'd have to show me a scroll that dates back to the time period in which they were in Babylonian captivity, going all the way to Persian captivity, where they have a perfectly preserved scroll today that we can say, look, this is exactly how they was keeping it back then, or a pre-exilic scroll that would tell us, or anything complementary to the pre-exilic scroll. It could be commentary, anything. We don't have any of that. So this is a reconstructive process. And knowing that, can you say for certainty that what the Ashkenazim was able to preserve today is the original way that Torah was practiced? Because we know a lot of the Mishnaic writings that was based on the Sanhedrin rulings to try and ascertain what the oral Torah is, that's based on things that arose during the Greco-Roman period, where we had, after the Maccabean revolt, the Hasmonean dynasty, where we had the Pharisaic sect and the Sadducean sect pop up on the scene, along with the Essene sect and the Zealot sects. These are various people who are, some of them, just astute people. Some of them weren't even Levites. So how can we trust and say that the Ashkenazim today, if they are the genetic descendants of the Yahudim who returned back to Israel, that they perfectly have the Torah preserved to the point where they have the final authority on how it should be taught to all the other scattered tribes of Israel?
Right. Guido asking also an all-star question. It's a great question, and I hope we have a good answer. So I would ask everyone to do their own research also. There's a letter, a famous letter, that we've spoken about in the past that was written by the Ashkenazi Jewish community. I think it was about 200 years ago. It was written, I think it was sent towards Africa or into Africa. It didn't make it to the final destination, but we have a copy of the letter where they were searching for what we call the B'nai Moshe, the children of Moses, who supposedly are hiding in some region amongst the world that can't access until a certain time, for practicing all the original laws of Moses as Moses taught them. And the letter was begging for them to return back to Israel so they could bring back smicha, of official ordination for Moses' name, and to reestablish the laws in the courts of Israel. So the crux of the Jewish religion today is finding humans who who can show you the original customs of the Torah. But they say that they'll be able to still point to actual verses and show you that this is what this means or this is what this means, and expound upon the Torah. That's just what I want to open this on. Secondly, when you were saying how let's say the Second Temple had exile influence on the culture of the Judeans because they were coming from Babylon, they're speaking Aramaic. First and foremost, I'm under the impression the people of Israel didn't speak Holy Tongue as a mundane language. There was always some form of communication between them. But you have certain books of the Tanakh are written in Aramaic, and there was a time when there was with Daniel when the writing was on the wall. Some people believe that was actually the writing of the holy language that people didn't know, but he understood it. And so I wanted to go back to my main point is, let's say you have Daniel, and you're still at the time of prophets. At the time of the Second Temple, there was still a crossover of prophecy. Now, if there's prophecy, doesn't that mean that the Creator is still there with the people guiding them? And I want to reference a specific point. So the Jewish people today, we pray 3 times a day. And so someone says, that sounds good, but I'm not into the whole rabbi thing, so I don't do 3 times a day. That's not my thing. But if you look at Daniel in the scriptures, it was very clear there was a time when he was in distress, and it says he went to the window 3 times a day to pray. So we believe that the laws that we've preserved are still coming from the time of prophecy and Ezra and Nehemiah, so we feel validated to say that these are what we're supposed to be keeping in the exile. Even though, and that now for just to move forward another time, he said with the Septuagint, when there was, I think, 70 sages of Israel were forced by the Greeks to translate the Torah into Latin, I believe. And you said they all wrote, they wrote certain things differently because they didn't want to blasphemize the name of God. You're 100% right. I'll tell you a story behind the scenes because our teachings of Torah come from those 70 sages that translated are part of the traditions that we're keeping today. And when they taught over that there was a miracle that day that we still celebrate, when they were each that translates Torah to Latin, they were each put in a separate room. They weren't allowed to sit together to do it. They weren't allowed to communicate one with another. And the miracle was that each 70 of them had altered the translation just enough to keep certain things sacred and not profaned by bringing it to the Latin language. So that was a strong miracle. And now, and I understand what you're saying that the Torah that we have today, is that the Torah that everyone should be practicing? And I'll go back to my prior answer that no, I don't think this should be about conversion or you following my way of understanding the Torah. But as far as when the Torah says, I think that we have the exact scriptures, the 5 books of Moses. I think that has been preserved. Now, how we understand it, that's another question. For example, it says in the book, we should build a sukkah, make booths. So from the perspective of the African American, I respect that you're looking into Africa and decoding what's what, but I'd want to know, what is your understanding? What is a booth? Is how do you make it? What could it be made of? Anything? And all the nuances of making a booth. Those are commandments that if you wanted to keep it, how do you understand the verses? And just to end on that note, you're also saying, which I think is very cool what you're doing, looking into places who have Israelite origins and deciphering their culture to see if we could put anything in, retroactively build a puzzle. You mentioned the Urim and the Tumim, which is what they used on the breastplate of the high priest of Israel to kind of predict the future or to get answers from God about questions that they would have about what to do as a nation. If you come up with a theory of how that was happening and how people are doing it and how people may be doing that in Africa and have the power of the Urim and Tumim, I'm sure it'll be a global breakthrough that the whole world will want to learn about, and I would be the first guy on board to learn the theory.
Well, Ron, can I just jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna address a couple of things. The Urim and Thummim practices of the ephod could still be seen as practiced by the priest, the ephod priest and the Dibia ephod priest and the Evos, and also the Yoruba divination trade with the ephod priest that they have with the sand and the cola nuts, and trying to get an answer from God using the different mechanisms that was used, practiced by the Urim and the Thummim stones. And then also you also see that also in the Awe people, you have hoodoo or voodoo. They also have an ephod divination system as well that goes back to the ancient Levitical priesthood and the Urim and the Thummim practices of when there was no prophet and the Israelites needed an answer from God, and they used these yes and no binary systems to basically come up with an answer. But when you talk about the being converted to your Torah versus the older Torah, which Ron has talked about with the exile, when you look at this is what I talk about in my books and even the movie that's coming out, and when you talk about a lot of different tribes, like when like Muhammad Bello talked about the people in West Africa, like the Mandingos, and he talked about that they came from the land between 2 rivers. Of course, they're talking about the Nile River and also the Euphrates River, the Euphrates River, and the Euphrates River basically runs through Iraq, which is Babylonia. And so a lot of you got to read a lot of books, and you'll find out that the Mandingo people have a history where they came from the era of the Babylonian exile. So if they came from the era of the Babylonian exile and made their way into Africa, then if you're talking about the southern tribes that were exiled into Babylonia, and then you had some of the southern tribes that came back to Israel in the Second Temple period, then you would also be talking about the Mandingo people as well. And it's interesting because the Mandingo people can be seen, their genetic and their fossils. Even the ancient historians can talk about them being seen in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, being the black Jews, as well as the Yorubas and also the Congolese people. But when you look at people like, say, Al-Idrisi of Andalusia, Spain, he was an Arab Muslim around the 12th century AD. He said, he quoted, "In the whole land of Lam, there are but 2 small cities, or as it were, villages, and those of Malel and Dao stood at the distance of 4 days' journey from each other. Their inhabitants, as the people of these parts relate, are Jews, most of them unbelieving and ignorant." And in my books and in the movie that's coming out, I show how the languages of the Mandingo people, or the Malinke people, you will see evidence of ancient Egyptian in the language, you see evidence of Hebrew in the language, and you see evidence of the ancient Babylonian, Assyrian, cuneiform, what you might even call the Proto-Sumerian script in their language as well. And the reason why I know is because I have a lot of friends that are from Senegal and from Gambia, and they speak Mandingo, they speak Pular, they speak different Soninke, they speak different languages. So they know how to speak the languages of that area when they call it different things. Even the ancient Wolof language. And so when different people mention different cities like Takrur and Taurud and Wangara and Mexara and Yauri and Alada and Dahomey and Barisa and Dao and Malau and all these different Lam, they're basically these ancient historians like Leo Africanus and Muhammad Bello and Ali Jussi and Mungo Park and all these different people. They're talking about the Hebrew Israelites that scattered from the Assyrian exile and from the Babylonian exile into West Africa. And they continue to do these ancient old customs, such as when somebody gets beaten or stripes, they have to do 39. They can't go to 40. And you say, well, wait a minute, that's in Deuteronomy. You're talking about 39 save 1 stripe, so 40 stripes. You can't do 40 stripes. This is in the Bible. And so different things like as worshiping and offering sacrifices, libations, drink offerings, purity laws. Draining the blood before you eat the animal. Worshiping, and resting on the Sabbath or 7 days after the new moon. Starting each month with the new moon. All these different things that were being practiced, including the ancient language and the ancient script, which has been Arab, basically kind of like influenced by the Arab religion now. These all go back to ancient Hebrew, and this is what I wanted to really address with you, Harry, because you talked to Stephen Graham, and Stephen Graham has done a lot of documentaries like Secrets of the Desert with the Black Arabs or the Tarabian tribes who say that they came from the Ishmaelite people, the Ishmaelite from Abraham. So you look at that and you look at your people. You told him that you guys are descendants of the Jews that were sold to the Romans. So we're talking about the Jews that were, the Israelites that were scattered into Africa, because that's what the Israelites did. They went to Africa. They fled into the mountains. But you're talking about your people, the Ashkenazi Sephardic Jews, are the ones that were sold to the Romans in 70 AD. That's what you quoted to Stephen Graham. Now, when you talk about different people like the Romanite Jews say that they basically left Israel around 70 AD and they went up into Greece, right? And they say that they're not descendants of the Ashkenazi Sephardic Jews. However, when they did their DNA test, what they found was they found evidence of an Edomite influence and also evidence of a Greek influence, which is I know you don't know much about DNA, but when I said the DNA, it all kind of makes sense. The Y DNA G most often correlates to Greece or Macedonia, even Italy or Rome, and I'm going to explain why. And the E1B1B DNA also was found amongst these Romanite Jews along the Mediterranean coast of the Mediterranean Sea in Europe. And so these people did not have the same DNA type as African Americans or people in West Africa. Now, a lot of people say, well, the Jews, they say that we're Jews by our maternal lineage, but they've had people that have studied at the University of Huddersfield. They've done scientific research that says that the maternal line of the Ashkenazi Jews can be traced to Eastern Europe, basically Europe, period. And they mentioned to different, maternal DNA types like H, HV, J, U, and K, and T, to name a few, that are strong markers of the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jew. Now, this is the thing. When they did the DNA project, family DNA project, because this is the thing, you break down DNA, Everybody gets half. They get pairs of DNA. They get half of their pairs from their mom, half of their pairs from their father. You have 23 chromosomes. The 23rd chromosome is the sex chromosome. You have the male chromosome, which is the Y. You have the maternal chromosome, X, which is maternal DNA. You also have the other 1 through 22 chromosomes, which is your autosomal DNA. Okay, so when they did the family tree DNA project and they tested Italy, they tested Greece, what they found was the people that they tested, they had names like Giovanni, Salvatore, Niccolo, Antonio, Giorgio, Alfredo, Giuseppe, Luigi, Sergio, Angelo, Michelangelo. When they tested their DNA had the same DNA. These are Christian, Catholic, atheists, regular Italians, regular Greeks, and they had the same DNA as you guys. They had the DNA of the Edomite influence, because we all know about the Book of Yashin, the Book of Jubilees, where it talks about Zepho and the Edomite, and the Edomites taking over Chittim. We know that during the time of the Maccabean period, that the Maccabees converted the Edomites into becoming Jews, and that from that day forward they were known as Jews. And so you had the Herodians ruling over Judea, them finishing up the Second Temple. You had the Greeks as well, and you had the majority of Judea was inhabited by Gentiles. And so it's no coincidence that when you test the DNA of the people in Europe, just regular people in Europe, and also your DNA of the Ashkenazi Jews, what you'll find is you'll see the same DNA. You see the E1B1B, you see G, you see the Y DNA I, which correlates to Finland, Scandinavia, Norway, Sardinia, the people that say the descendants of the ancient giants, and they're all white in those areas as well. And this is the crazy thing. When you look at the Greek conquest that happened with Alexander the Great and the Theodochi generals, Seleucus Nicator, which is in the Apocrypha, which is in the Book of Maccabees, and how Alexander the Great and his generals went all the way into the Mauryan Empire, which is basically North India and Afghanistan, Pakistan. So if you pay attention, listen to what I'm saying. There are people over there that have red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes, they're white skinned, they don't look like the Afghan or the Pakistani people. They are called the Kalas people and the Burashasky people. They say they are the descendants of Alexander the Great's conquest, the Greeks. They speak a language that's related to the Phrygian language, which is related to the Turkish Armenian language, which also has Greek influences. These people, when they tested their DNA was different than the other Afghanistan, Pakistan people that may have the R1A, whatever. They had the DNA of the Greeks, which is G, which is also seen in the Ashkenazi Jews, as well as the E1B1A Edomite influence, as well as the DNA that's seen in Eastern Europe, which corresponds to the Khazars, to the people that live in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and all these different areas in Central Asia, just the same that Benjamin Friedman was talking about on the audio clip. Central Asia, Russia. So when you look at the DNA of the Russians, look at the DNA of the Ashkenazi Jews, you will see that it's all the same, because it tells the migration point from the Greek conquest of Judea to the Edomite conquest and influence of Judea to the fall of the Second Temple. You guys didn't flee into Africa, because if you did, we will see all your DNA types all throughout sub-Saharan Africa, but it's not there. You know, there's no evidence of the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Zohar, any of that stuff. None of that stuff is evident in sub-Saharan Africa. These people don't know about the word Jew or Judaism or Talmud Judaism. They just doing life, which is their Hebrew traditions and customs. But when you go to you guys are the ones that fled where? To the north, to Europe, because that's where you guys came from. You guys were Greeks and Romans, and when the Romans came, you guys fled into Roman, and you also had some Edomites that probably fled over that way area, and eventually you guys got converted into Judaism in the land of Khazaria. And you guys converted to Judaism. You didn't convert to Islam, Christianity. But you guess what? Who was the ones that converted to Islam? When you talk about the Uzbek and Turkmenistan community, the Uyghurs, the person that just ran through New York City and killed a lot of people, they claim ISIS did it, right? So the Uzbekian community, the Uzbek community, the Uzbek Arab community said he's a part of our community, but we don't condone what he just did. Why do they say Uzbek community? Because the Uzbekistan and the Turkmenistans are the fathers of the Turks. They're the ones that converted to Islam from their pagan ways, just like you guys converted from your pagan ways in Khazaria to the religion of Judaism. And so this is the reason why the traditions and customs that are seen in sub-Saharan Africa are older and more ancient, showing who's the real people versus you guys who say that you preserved the Torah. Well, you preserved the Torah because you had the Maccabees, you had the Greeks, you had all these different Gentiles that, understood and kind of picked up where the people that had been exiled from Israel are left off. We already know about that from the Sumerians. So Ron is correct in what he's saying because, you guys are not lining up with the ancient Torah and the Hebrew traditions and customs, the Paleo-Hebrew that Rabbi Basil from the God tribe was trying to explain to you, that's still embedded in the language of the Awe people and other people that are from the Kwa family and the Mandingo family and the Mende family and the Bantu family. And so this is the whole reason why there needs to be clarification that there are the true Hebrew Israelites that don't need to convert to you guys' Talmudic Judaism because we are the original people. You guys are the converts.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I just want to start a quick answer. Again, my premise is that no one should be converting, just to make that clear. But secondly, just to move forward, I think I want to explain why I think there's a few holes in what you just said and to see if you could help me plug them in. Because you're saying basically we're the descendants from 70 AD, from Roman slaves, and then you're saying that 900 years later, during some Khazars converted, you're saying we're like 3 conversions deep of being removed from the Israelites or something. That's what it would seem. But what you're not taking into consideration is when we were exiled to Babylon, and at the destruction of 70 AD, a percentage of people went to Rome and Italy, and we could actually trace their families today of who those families are. There's specific Wikipedia pages for the descendants of the Roman and Italian slaves. But you're not considering the institutions of Torah study that was flourishing in Babylon until around the year 900, where we had an exilarch, which was someone from the house of David who was appointed to be liaison with the nations around us and the schools of Torah study in Babylon. It wasn't until the year 900 or 1000 that some of the sages from the Babylonian institutions made it to the Mediterranean, Italian, Roman communities and helped strengthen Torah study over there. So the Torah that we have today, I can't imagine why we would suggest, and furthermore, during the time we were speaking about were their converts during the Second Temple period of Romans and the Greeks as well, and Assyrians, that we, in the laws that were written down during this time, we write down who were the converts and who weren't. We kept good records of all of that, so we see very clearly that you were right, there were converts. But if we were trying to whitewash this or trying to erase this history and pretend we're the real Israelites, we would just say, no, there's no converts, we're the real families. But they were humble people, the people who wrote down the laws, and they accepted converts, as we could see as a verse in the law that you have to treat a convert as a brother, as an equal. And some of those converts became great sages as well on the list of transmission. And now you speak about DNA also, like I said before, Joseph could have gone to Egypt and had Egyptian kids. And he did go to Egypt, have Egyptian kids. If they never united with the people of Israel, hypothetically, they would have stayed in Egypt for 2,000 years, becoming a great nation from one Israelite. So again, we say the Ashkenazi Jews are coming from 4 women converts who married Israelite men. That could be the case from 200 families that were very small remnants. And even King David, who had Moabite blood in him from Moab, we don't know who from Moab could have married, European. There's so much speculation in your theory, though, that makes so many generalities. It's going to create more divisions than unity. But I think the main thing is not to engage our communities together in relationship to you have to convert to what we have and what you have is inferior. What each of us has is cool right now. There's something much greater going on, which I know you're aware of because of your Instagram page. There's an evil in the world and there's an agenda towards evil. That should be something that it becomes the cornerstone of nation building, of how to disempower that evil. And I'm not going to say I don't think that maybe there's Jewish people or aspects of Israel that has to do with that. I may be on board with that, and we may have to be revolutionary. But that's just the direction I think we should take these relationships in.
Well, Rabbi, we're definitely going to have a part 2, but I want to just lay this on you. The thing is, when you have documentation, because we all know that before the Scandinavians came into Russia and they named it Rus or Russia and they basically converted everybody to Christianity. Before that, you had the Khazars. Back in the 9th century AD, you have people saying that there exist people under the sky in regions where no Christians can be found, whose name is Gog and Magog, and who are Huns. Among them is one called the Khazari, who are circumcised and observe Judaism in its entirety. This is from a Westphalian mob. This is from basically 864 AD. And you have other people like an Arab traveler, Ibn Fadian, was son of Fadian in 922 AD. He says, the Khazars and their kings are all Jews. The Bulgars and all their neighbors are subject to him. They treat him with worshipful obedience. Some are the opinion that they are Gog and Magog, or the Khazars. When you also talk about Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, He lived around the 1st century A.D. The side note, he mentions the Hebrews were a race of Ethiopian origin in his works, but he also quoted from one of his books. He said that about the Germany people, about the Germanics in Europe. He said, this is for you. He said, for my part, I agree with those who think that the tribes of Germany are free from all the taint of intermarriages with foreign nations, and that they appear as a distinct, unmixed race like none but themselves. Hence, too, the same physical peculiarities throughout the so vast population. He said that the Germanic people have fierce blue eyes, red hair, huge frames, white skin, fit only for their southern exertion. They are less able to bear laborers' work. Heat and thirst they cannot bear, and the cold and hunger of the climate and soil suit them well. So he's basically telling the people that the Germanic people were white-skinned people with blue eyes and red hair. They could not stand the sun because they lived in the cold areas, which is basically where the Scythians and the Sarmatians and the Uzbek and the Khazars all lived at. And so when you look at your DNA, these people are saying this, but the DNA is also lining up with the fact that you guys are descendants from these regions. When you talk about the Avars, the Ugyars, you talk about the Huns, the Scythians, the Alans, the Armenians, the Romans, all these different people. So when you look at Yiddish, and it's a Turkish Slavic Germanic language that's mixed in with some Hebrew, you understand now where you guys came from. Because Yiddish wouldn't have Germanic and Slavic and Turkish components to it if you guys didn't come from Central Asia, just like Benjamin Freeman said. If you know how to speak German, you can kind of understand Yiddish, right? Am I correct?
Sure.
Right. And so if you guys, let me just say this. If you look at the old Ashkenazi Jews like Theodor Herzl and a lot of the old Ashkenazi Jews in black and white pictures, you see majority of them have black hair, they have black eyebrows, they have brown eyes. They look no different than your modern day people in Turkmenistan, in Iraq, Iran, Palestine, the Ottoman Turks, the Uyghurs, the Uzbekians, the Turkmenistans, the people that converted to Islam, but you guys converted to Judaism. Your DNA fits who you are. And it's no coincidence that in the land of Israel that you guys at one point were second in the nation in skin cancer. And the people that were born in Israel had a higher rate of getting skin cancer than the people that came from the Rhineland or Germany. So that shows you that you guys are not native to the land. You guys are from Europe. And you guys adopted and converted to Judaism. But the old Torah and the old traditions and customs, which the people in West Africa, the Baptist people would just say, this is our way of life. We've been doing this for a long time. We never thought that it was Hebrew until now we're starting to awaken. So, like what Ron says, we don't have no reason to justify who we are to you guys or to follow what you guys say or have you guys come into Africa with the hexagram star of Remphan and Moloch and come in with Talmudic Judaism and all these different things. We don't need that. People need to understand who are the real Hebrew Israelites and who are the Gentiles, the strangers, the foreigners, and we need to get rid of some of the stuff that you guys are teaching because it's not the right thing. But like I said, at the end of the day, it all comes back to biblical prophecy and God's perfect plan with the millennial temple of what's really going to happen in the end. So with that being said, you can go ahead and say what you got to say, and I'll let Ron jump in.
Awesome, thanks. I just wanted to follow up, which is just to reiterate my point is I agree with you that the solution is not teaching Talmudic Judaism to the people around the world to identify as being from the people of Israel. That wouldn't seem like the most logical next steps to me as we discussed tonight. But I don't think, like I said last time we spoke on the show, I don't think you should think of theories of why the people of Israel couldn't have been white back then, because as I say, we teach ourselves when the law was redacted 2,000 years ago, wrote down in the Mishnah, we teach that the children of Israel weren't light-skinned, they were more dark-skinned. So that's not something that, if that was like something that could, make a hole in our story, it would be clear that we would try to cover that up. But that makes total sense to us that we weren't white 2,000 plus years ago. And my question to be, let's say in the hypothetical world, there's a book, I would hope everyone listening has read it, if you believe the Khazar theory. It's called the Kuzari. It was a dialogue written between an Israelite sage from, I think, the Mediterranean coast and the Khazar king about which religion the Khazar king should convert to. And he was writing back and forth with the sage of Israel, or they're having a dialogue, and it's written down what the conversation was. It's a mind-blowing conversation. Let's say hypothetically there was at one point a Khazar conversion. My question would be who converted them? What law was that? Was that the law that I'm speaking about that's from the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, which has divine elements to it that allowed conversion or not? So what I would say is, if there was or wasn't a Khazar conversion, or if or not the most Ashkenazim are born from European converts, according to the law that they're keeping, that was preserved from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the time of prophecy, would that make a big difference? What would the matter be? And you said, like we speak Yiddish, so that must mean that we're not from the region. That's like me saying to you, you speak English, so it must mean you're not from the tribes of Israel. That was an exile language that was picked up so they could, so they could interact. And as we've recorded, and why we spoke Aramaic as well, is the holy tongue is not supposed to be spoken as a common language. It's supposed to be used for holy matters. So there was always some type of slang that the people of Israel were speaking. And just like the ones in the Israelites in Morocco spoke Arabic, the ones in Spain spoke Spanish, where there was ones in Greek. Wherever we were, we've adopted to those regions.
Well, Rabbi, when you look at you guys had to go to. There's pictures of you guys in the early 1900s going to Hebrew school to learn Hebrew. When you look at the Congo Bantu languages, you will see Hebrew all throughout their languages. This is not something that they had to go to school to learn for. This is in their. This is them. This is what they had in their language. The same with the Igbos. I put this in my book showing all the Hebrew that's in the Igbo language. Not something they had to learn from the Jews or learn from Hebrew schools. This is in their language. And on the side, though, when you look at, in the Bible, it talks about, Moses and mountains and Mount Sinai and Mount Nebo and also it talks about the cloud that appeared on Mount Sinai and Joshua, Moses told the elders to stay here. We're going to go up and there's a cloud. You see there's a central point in terms of the mountains. In the Kikuyu people in Kenya, they call their mountain the place where God dwells, or God's resting place, which is Mount Kenya. In their language, they call it Kirinyaga. And you look at the Basa community in Cameroon, they have a hill. It's like a hill mountain called the Ngak, the Tuba, which served as the holiest place of the Basa people. And they go there once a year to perform sacrifices. And the Germans came in, they stopped it, and they told them they couldn't do this anymore. And you also see in Malawi, you see the Chiwa tribe and the Yawa tribe. And you see that you have the Batwa Pygmies. The Batwa Pygmies, they really like this mountain called the Molang Mountain. They say that the history states that back in the day, the Bantus people helped their people defeat the giants, and they rid of the land of most of the giants that were in the region. That the Bantus people, they had one man. He was a chief of the Bantus people, and they said that this mountain was the mountain that they were talking about. They had it basically was being taught by the Bantus people about their oral tradition, their history, the Hebrew Israelite history. And so you see all these ancient traditions and customs that they didn't have to learn. Nobody in the Baptist community had to learn this. This was stuff passed down to them from generation to generation to generation. They didn't have anything. When going through all these different sieges and wars, all you had was the oral history passed down from the elders. That's why the elders and the priests are the living history. So if you want to know the history of the people, what do the white Jewish people do? They go to Africa. They want to speak to the elders. They want to speak to the priests. They keep searching on hunts for who knows what. And just like in the movie Doing Jewish, in the Suffolk community in Western Ghana, they had to go to all the different elders and find out, these people are doing stuff straight out the Old Testament. Out of the Old Testament. And their oral history states that they came from Israel, went into Egypt. And then from Egypt, eventually they landed their way in Ghana. But you guys, you said you guys preserved the Torah, you guys, Yiddish, what does that mean? It means that you guys originally had a language that was not Hebrew. You guys originally converted to Judaism. You learned the Hebrew language. So you're not the original people. You learned the customs and traditions from who? The Greeks and the Edomites that knew it. From who? The people that were there before.
Just to take into consideration why I thought there was holes in your story, you're not taking into account the Babylonian institutions of Torah that flourished, and you're speaking about a very small group of people and putting on a very large picture. And just to say again, Hebrew school, the concept of Hebrew school is a modern phenomenon because today they say we lose more Jews today than have died during the Holocaust because of assimilation, of not caring to be Jewish, forgetting that they're Jewish, and marrying a Christian, having a Christmas tree in the house. The kids don't know it. So I personally was born to a family that wasn't observant. We were not keeping the commandments. We were just living as Americans, going to McDonald's on Friday nights and all that stuff. And then when I was around, and when I was a young kid, even in public school, I had to go twice a week after school to Hebrew school so I could study Hebrew. And I promised to my mom I would never do this to my kids, like the torture. Why would I do this to my kids? And then when I was about 12, 13, my whole family started studying Torah, and we readapted the way of our ancestors, and we became religious. And then when I became around 19, 20, I started taking it very seriously and increasing in my studies. and really understanding what that I wanted to be a part of it. And what I had learned was that the assimilation, the concept of a secular Jew was a modern phenomenon in Germany. So let's say the fact that Jews shave today is a phenomenon. You look 400 or 500 years ago, before modernization in Germany, there was no Jew throughout the European exile who would consider shaving. It would have been a crazy thing to have been done. So yeah, when you speak about Hebrew, that we're in the exile as well. We're also in America, being fluoridated and watching these TV programs, and we're being destroyed by secular culture. That's not a question that we're struggling from that. That's not enough of proof to say that the transmission of information that we have didn't actually go back from the time of the prophets of the Second Temple, which, again, that doesn't mean you guys in Africa have to adapt them or learn or change it. I think it's cool that you're trying to find Israelite customs and traditions in Africa. And just to circle back to my point, because I think we all got to know each other's points by now, is that I think that the next step is figuring out how to dismantle evil systems on planet Earth and not trying to alienate certain groups who are all around the world trying to bring the redemption of Israel.
Okay, well, Ron, I know I speak a lot, and I know we're going to probably have to have a part two if you guys are willing to do that. Maybe next week if you guys are free. Ron, do you want to say anything? Because we got about six minutes left. Sorry for cutting just saying all this stuff.
No, it's all good. I enjoyed the dialogue from both you and Harry. Very insightful, and I know it was edifying to the audience as well. I'll just give some final words, and then I'll let you guys end off formally. So what I want to say is that, in listening to the dialogue, my main premise is that, going back to the way Torah was pre-exile, when Israel received it from Moshe, all the way up until they were exiled, they were able to be a sovereign, self-contained nation where they were actively practicing Torah, okay? An example of that is the Yavnei Yam Astrakhan, okay? The Yavnei Yam Astrakhan is a letter that was found. So an Astrakhan is a potsherd from pottery that was broken, so it has secondary use. So what they would do is that they would turn it around to the more rougher side, and they would use it to write on, right? And they would use it to create letters. Well, in the Yavnei Yam Astrakhan that anybody always listens to can look up, we see a situation where an employee is writing about a grievance that he had with his employer. And he's writing this to the governor, which means that it made it to the Supreme Court, right? It passed the local judges and it made it to the Supreme Court, this particular case. And what his grievance is that he's saying that according to his employer, he did not meet his quota, right, for the day. And because he didn't meet his quota, what his employer did was he took his cloak, and he held his cloak, and he said, I'm going to keep your cloak until you meet this quota. Well, what happened was this individual understood Torah, and what he did was he filed his grievance to say, hey, according to the law that we keep here, this person cannot keep my cloak after sundown because I would be naked and I have nothing to clothe myself to keep myself from the cold. So we see a real-life example of Torah playing out in the pre-exilic period. So we know at least that of one of many mitzvot was something that was actually practiced, and that principle was still kept within the land prior to them going into exile. But the only way that we would know that this exists, because we don't have any autographs of the manuscripts that we have today in Torah, right, or even in the rest of the Nevi'im and the Ketubim, we wouldn't have even known that this was actually played out in real life. We would just assume it based on the literature that we subscribe to, but we cannot force everybody else to subscribe to it as well because they may not share the same worldview. So archaeology is helpful in helping to help us to identify other parts of the customs and practices of Torah that occurred that we don't see in the text, right? So the text that we have today is a much later recension. The earliest that we have, we can look at maybe the Silver Scrolls, and that itself is fragments. I mean, everything after that, we have the Septuagint, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the Samaritan Pentateuch, we have the Nash Papyrus, and we can go on and on. The Geniza Cairo manuscripts, the Masoretic texts, which then later on became the majority text types, etc. So all of these things we have was after exile. So how do we know how things were properly practiced pre-exile? Well, we have to go into archaeology, and then we have to examine peoples who migrated out of the land and they carry their traditions with them via oral memory and oral tradition and social memory, and find out where they were scattered to and what historical records that we have of individuals that lived in those areas. And with that information, we can start to reconstruct what these practices are of the mitzvot and the instructions of the Talmud that was being practiced prior to exile. So my research is focused on that, and what I've realized is that examining from individuals that have a shared experience as me in West Africa, where a lot of rabbis had went to go looking for the lost tribes, you see that there are other customs that they had when they discovered these individuals. You'll see it through Christian missionaries, and we also see that, I'll make this quick, and do Judaic missionaries who went into these areas. They saw that these individuals were practicing customs, and they were also practicing Torah, but they was like, wait a second, these other customs they practicing, it was foreign to them. But if you go back, for example, in Bereshit 35 and 14, we see Yaakov, he is doing a oblation of wine and oil over a stone memorial. This is still being practiced in West Africa today. This is a custom that the forefathers did and that was still being upheld while they were in the land. So we have to look at these other cultures that have preserved this and see, well, how are they practicing Torah, and use those elements to reconstruct a way for us to get back to the original alignment what the Most High has given to Israel before exile.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Well, Rabbi, I know you're tired. I know it's been a long night. I got 2 minutes. This is what I want to say. So if you want to come on next week, it's up to you, or just tell me when you and Ron want to come on again. Ron can have some more questions. I want to talk about the Nethinims and the Rechabites in Israel and the you guys, the European Jews, and I also want to talk about the reason and the proof that the British know who are the real children of Israel and why they've been scurrying the globe, killing people, invading people, stealing treasures, hiding stuff. The Roman Catholic Church, who is basically in cahoots with Israel, the Freemasons, and the whole thing is I could talk for days about the groves and the pyramid and the triangles and all the different things about the British and the Israelites scattered across the 4 corners. But I want to talk about that next time, in addition to keep going into Gog and Magog and who they are today in comparison to the real Hebrew Israelites that are scattered to the 4 corners pre-exile, the ones that preserve the old Torah, the old traditions, comes in the old Paleo-Hebrew language, and maybe Basil can join us as well to break that down for us as well. So that being said, Rabbi, thanks for being on the show. Ron, thanks for being on the show. I know you got a show tomorrow, and we're out of time. Basically, everybody needs to go to the www.thenegronetwork.com and check out my material, support a brother, and then tune in next week to the Hebrews to Negro show. Shalom.
Using the media, people can be convinced or swayed to believe anything Satan and man wants them to believe. Remember, the majority of all the TV channels we watch in America are not controlled by Indians, blacks, Latinos, Arabs, or Asians. Only those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will not be blinded by Satan in these last days. My mission is to wake up Black America and people of black descent all over the world, because a storm is coming and we need to be prepared for it. The time is now for us to wake up. So if you agree with my mission, my beliefs, and my message in the Hebrews to Negroes, please help me and my team make a difference.